this ship together, searching for a home. Despite the storm that hit us, we're still on board. Dancing in the moonlight, the world just stopped and stares. We got no destination, I'll take you anywhere. All the doors we've opened and all the books we've closed, words just come together, story that we never told. So far you're shaking for my own. You said just keep holding on. If you're about to break, I'll always be your captain. From our failures we have grown. You said just keep holding on. If you're about to break, I'll always be your captain. I'll be your captain. I'll always be your captain. I'll always be your captain. Told me I'm your anchor, I told you you're my pole. Through the wind and fire we tried, hold on. All the doors we've opened and all the books we've closed, words that come together, a story that we never told. So far you're shaking for my own. You said just keep holding on. If you're about to break,
Hello, and welcome back to CodeLabs. This is actually the very first workshop of the official start of CodeLabs, so I hope everyone is having a good time. I know some of you were able to join us for our pre-CodeLabs workshops last week, where we were talking about things like how to make an Android app, how to make a website, how to make a video game, really common CodeLabs projects. And so what I'm actually going to talk to you about today is not necessarily about, how to do any one project in particular, but more specifically how to decide what it is that you want to be working on. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch over here so you can see the slides as well. So we're going to be talking about something called design thinking. Design thinking is actually a really popular way of looking at trying to figure out what we're going to make. And I know that you probably are seeing the word design there, and you're thinking, oh, hey, design. That's what makes projects look nice, or makes is art or something like that, and that is potentially part of it. But we're really thinking about when you think of someone like designing a building, more along those lines, where it's not just about what it looks like, but it's about how it functions as a whole. So to really bring this home, I have an example here. You can see there's two phones here, and which one would you say is better designed? I think a lot of people immediately would think, oh, the iPhone is a much better looking phone than that Kyocera phone. So the iPhone is a better designed phone. But I actually think you'd be wrong here. And there's a good reason for that, which is that I think most of the people watching this video are probably the sort of people who need an iPhone. They need the sort of things that an iPhone does, but that's not everyone. So iPhones maybe are more popular among hipsters, whereas that Kyocera phone is extremely rugged. And you can imagine that if you're maybe a construction worker, that sort of phone is going to be the phone that's better for you. And in general, flip phones, not anyone I think that I know still uses a flip phone, except for people who really have a need for a rugged phone. And I have a friend who has one, and he can just throw it up in the air as high as it'll go, and it'll fall back down and hit concrete, and it'll still work, because it was built for that. And so both of these are very well designed. They just suit different people. They're good for different things. And that's sort of the goal of design thinking, is to think about not just what the product looks like, and not just what we want to make, but what products are really going to solve the need that a specific person or type of person needs. So design, like I said, is not just how it looks. One of the rules of good design by a guy named Dieter Rams, who's a very famous designer, his designs have inspired a lot of things, including, for example, if you've ever used the calculator app on the iPhone before the new iPhone, where everything was very flat, for example, or like the way that the clock looked on iOS, and a lot of like really stylish looking retro products. He was a designer, I think, at Braun for many, many years. And one of his principles is that good design makes a product useful. A product is bought to be used. It has to satisfy certain criteria, not only functional, but also psychological and aesthetic. It emphasizes the usefulness of a product while disregarding anything that could possibly detract from it. So our goal for design is not just to make it look pretty, but it's to make it functional. And if the product looks nice, but it's not functional, it's not well designed. And in fact, you've probably been on products like this. For example, if you've bought like a chair and it's just a really uncomfortable chair, it's potentially not a well-designed product, or at least not well-designed for you. Maybe the goal is to make it uncomfortable. An example of that, actually, by the way, the sort of adversarial design is like supermarkets. If you've ever been in a supermarket, you know the lights are like the fluorescent lights and it just feels so uncomfortable. They do that intentionally because their goal with the design is to actually make you uncomfortable so that you'll make more rash purchasing decisions and get out of there faster without thinking about what you're buying. But to them, that is useful. Our goals are probably going to be a little bit more noble here, but we really do want to think about not just how it looks, but how it actually functions. Why do we care about this? I think everyone here wants to make something that people love at some point. Here an example of a bunch of apps, games, mobile apps, websites, hardware products that these are all companies and products that people really, really love and care about and really mean a lot to people. And I think that everyone here, if you could make something as well received as any one of these products, you would probably be really happy about that. And so our goal with this workshop is to help you start to think about what it is that you want to work on through the lens of the way that many of these companies do. Through the lens of how can I make something that people are really going to like and it's going to become popular, and everyone's just going to think I'm the coolest person because I made this thing that they want. So that's what, when we're talking about design thinking, our goal is really to help you make a product that people love. There's another saying that's very popular among a lot of companies, just to give you an idea of how prevalent this is. There's a group called Y Combinator. I'm an alumni of their thing, but they basically fund startups, and they funded many of the top startups in the world. So Airbnb, Dropbox, Reddit, Twitch, many, Coinbase, like many wide range of startups all over the spectrum in terms of what they do. Again, everything from Reddit to Coinbase, I mean, that's pretty varied. They even funded Soylent. And their motto and the sort of main thing that they tell all of their companies when they fund them is make something people want. So just to give you an idea, I mean, this really is something that you may think, oh, this is all just, highbrow stuff. No one actually does this in the real world, but they do. It's a very popular way of thinking about things with companies. And many of the products that you really like were probably designed with some of these principles. So how do we make something that people want? How is it that we can make, we can create a process such that we decide on something that we want to make during CodeLabs that people are actually going to like? Well, first of all, we need to start with some rules. We don't want to come up with a way of thinking about this that's unrealistic. So here's some rules that are the generally accepted sort of like rules of design thinking. Everything is social in nature, so you really need to focus on people. You can't just focus on the technical stuff. When you're designing something, you need to think about the people. You can never know the right answer, and oftentimes there is no right answer. So you need to experiment. You need to try things. There's no way that you can mathematically prove what it is that you should be making. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Even companies that are really data-driven, it doesn't matter. There's always ambiguity. You can never know the right answer. 3, all design is inspired by something else. So that, it's not bad if you look at something else and you think this is great. I want to do something similar. That's the history of design. And I don't, again, just mean art. I mean designing products and things like that. Even things like the iPhone, which were revolutionary when they came out. The iPhone was inspired by Palm Pilots and Pocket PDAs. Everything is inspired by something else. Your goal is just to do a better job maybe than that thing that you're inspired by, or at least a better job for a group of people. And 4, make your ideas tangible ASAP. So we want to test things out really quickly because oftentimes what we think we're making isn't actually the right thing. And this gets into something that I think we'll talk about later in the week, called agile development, but basically, how companies actually make sure that they're constantly reevaluating whether or not they're making the right thing. So with those rules in mind, here's the process that people have come up with for design thinking. And this is sort of a large group of people. I don't think there's any one exact definition of design thinking, but there's some really involved people. The founder of a company called Ideate is one. There's a school at Stanford called the D School that has a lot of professors that are really working on this. And there's a person named Hasso Plattner, and the company I think he works for right now is SAP. And all of those groups are very involved in design thinking. Those are some of the people that have kind of pioneered this, but there's no one exact definition. In fact, even on the rules page, I actually sort of rewrote the rules to make them, I think, a little bit more understandable for students. But this is the general process most people follow. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And what does that mean? Well, we'll go through it right now. So empathize. That means getting to know your users. And it's okay if you are a potential user. And in fact, I'd encourage that. If you're building something that you personally want for CodeLabs, that's great. On the other hand, if you're not sure what you want to make for CodeLabs at all, maybe you just know I want to make a mobile app, but I don't know what I want to make that app for, just pick someone. You can pick your parents, you can pick your friends, but pick, a particular person, and then think about who are other people like them, and pick them. It doesn't even have to be a group that you're involved in. Maybe you want to make an app for, the drama department at your high school. That could be something that you could make an app for, even if you're not involved with it. And I'm sure that if you could find a problem that they need solved, they'd be really excited about you making that app. It could be people that you want to get to know, but aren't, you don't know right now. You could make an app for professional developers, and then, all of a sudden you're going to be potentially well known in the developer field. But you need to get to know your users, and we'll talk about how to do that. 2, you need to define the problem. You need to, once you've talked to your users, you understand their wants, their needs, what problems they're having. You need to pick one specific thing that you're going to do, one goal that you're trying to solve. We'll revisit later on whether or not your product actually solves that goal, but you need to pick a goal that you're setting out to achieve. 3, ideate. So we need to come up with ideas for how to solve that goal. So again, we went from, we know we have a problem, to here's a solution, here's a problem that we want to solve, to 3, here's some potential solutions to that problem. So we went from general ideas to specific idea to here are some ideas to solve that. This is like the brainstorming phase is what we would typically, you might typically think of this as, but there's other ways to do it than just brainstorming. 4, prototypes. You have to actually make the thing. And we'll talk about how to do this, but the goal is actually to do the least work possible. We're trying to be as lazy as possible. One of the things that comes up over and over again in the corporate world for developers, all over the place, is you want to be lazy if you can. And 5, we're actually going to test it and see whether or not it solved the problem. So going into that first step, that empathizing thing, being aware of, sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings of another is what, when I looked up empathize, I found as the definition. But another way to say that is you're trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And again, maybe that can be your own. You could be thinking of just yourself as a user. But even if you're thinking of just yourself, there's probably other potential people who could be using your game, your app, your website. You're trying to understand their problems and desires. Now, particularly if you're not your own user, there's a few ways to try to understand that. So let's say that, for example, you want to, make an app for tennis players, and you have never played tennis in your life. Where do you start? I don't know why, by the way, but let's just say that you do. First of all, start with interviews. That's a really good one. Just go find people and talk to them about what problems they have. Just, chat with them. You can come up with a list of questions ahead of time. The one thing that I would say with interviews is that you have to be careful of is you have to be careful not to ask like really leading questions. You're not trying to force them to have a problem that you think they have. You really have to go into this with an open mind. So if you think that tennis players have a problem where they need an automated ball shooting robot for practicing, you don't want to go in and ask them just immediately, do you need an automated robot to shoot tennis balls at you so you can practice? Because the answer to that is probably yes. Like generally people won't say no, I don't need that at all. Most people will say yes, but then that's not necessarily the right, they wouldn't necessarily buy it, for example, or they wouldn't necessarily actually use it. Another way of putting this that I always like to use, a friend of mine came up with it, is he calls them ice cream questions. And the idea is, if you ask someone, are you going to, do you want ice cream? Do you want ice cream? Unless they're lactose intolerant, most people are going to say, yes, I want ice cream. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea to open an ice cream shop. So depending on the price of the ice cream, like, is the ice cream shop located in the middle of nowhere? Am I selling meat-flavored ice cream? Again, is the price, like, is the ice cream, covered in gold leaf and it costs $40 a scoop? All of those things are actually the questions that you need to be asking when you're thinking about whether or not, the person has this problem. You don't want to lead them into an answer. You want to try to genuinely understand what problems they are really frustrated with day to day, or what they really want, or you're really trying to understand them as a person. You're not trying to force your own ideas on them, because then there's just a waste of your time. You'll build something and it'll turn out that no one wants it. Another way is to spend time with them. So if you want to, build an app for tennis players, just hang out around the tennis courts for a while. You don't have to play tennis. Just be like, yeah, I'm trying to learn more about tennis players because I want to build an app for them. A lot of people would be happy to just chat with you casually as well, even if you don't have any questions prepared. And you can just watch them and try to see what's going on. Look for extremes. And I don't mean extreme, problems to try to solve. I mean extreme people. So if you wanted to build an app for tennis players again, one way to go about it would be to email the top tennis players in the world. That's one extreme. Or maybe you want to build an app for novice people. So you want to find the absolute newest people possible, get someone to actually head over, to the tennis court who's never played before, and that's an extreme as well. And last of all, as a general practice, you want to be curious. So when you're talking to people and trying to figure out what problems they solve, what desires they have, keep an open mind. Again, you really don't want to go in with any preconceptions. You really do need to be careful to listen to what the person actually says and ask follow-up questions, and just generally try to explore all of the possibilities there before you actually get into the process of making something. Because if you don't do a good job at this, you're not going to make something that people want. You might make something that solves a problem, but it won't be a problem that they have. We'll talk about that later in the week for sure. We're doing an interview on, I think, Wednesday with Edward Zhang, where he's going to talk about what we usually call features versus benefits and deciding what to work on. Once you have those, here's a good way to represent it. This is called an empathy map. You can find this online. Doesn't need to be written this way, but this is a good way to sort of explore these these general topics. So let's go through an example, because I know that this is all really abstract, and I think that one thing that would be sort of a problem that you would have is trying to understand all of this when it's that abstract. So a potential solution is to actually let's go through an example. So let's say I want to make a game. So who are we making the game for, first of all? Are we making it for professional gamers, or somebody who takes the bus to work? Again, you could be your own user, right? But what is the problem that you are really trying to solve in this case? Is it that you're trying to fill up, your free time? So this is, I am someone who really enjoys puzzle games. So things like The Witness or Steven's Sausage Roll, or Baba Is You. That is me, right? I'm thinking of myself. I enjoy lots of games, but I'm thinking of myself specifically as this type of person. Who are some other people like that? You want to kind of define the group. You don't want to say just a specific person. You want to kind of define the group. So again, gamers, even though I like lots of games, gamers is not necessarily the, it's not specific enough. You want to be a little bit more specific than that. Not so specific as a specific person, but more specific than gamers. What do they need to do? So am I looking for a game because, I need a game to play with my significant other? Am I looking for a game because I want to have a LAN party with my friends and stay up all night playing a video game? Those are probably going to result in different games because they're different needs. What do they see? What are some other games that are out there that they think of as really exciting? If you just ask them, like, what are some other games that you like? What are some other games that you think are interesting? What do they say? And again, you need to talk with them, but are there words that they use a lot? Are there like particular lingo that they use? Like different things like that, you have to actually pay attention to what they're actually saying. What do they do? So what are they playing right now? Is it, they're just playing the 1999 edition of StarCraft, the original one, because the new ones are bad and they don't like League of Legends and that sort of stuff, That's probably a group of people. What do they hear? So what are their friends doing? What are their friends talking about? What are the things that they've heard about in the news? That'll give you an idea about them as well. That's how rather than just saying I want to make a game, those are actually the questions that I would start to ask, to think about. And you can imagine how just half of these questions could easily turn into a 15 to 30 minute question on its own, a discussion on its own, right? If you were to sit down with someone for coffee, you could easily go through an hour just trying to understand what sort of games they play and what they care about in a game. But it would be helpful. Again, oftentimes the best case scenario is when you're also your own user, but it's still good to think about these. And the other thing to keep in mind is you don't have to take all of their feedback. People don't always know exactly what they want. People generally know what problems they have, but when you're talking about things like what do they do right now, what do they see, they don't always necessarily know the example and know the correct answer. And in fact, oftentimes with things like games, which are definitely a little bit more creative and artistic, people will be confused if you give them this new mechanic. I remember the guy who made the game Braid, who's one of the very early indie video games, apparently was tweeting about a little while ago how a lot of people early on couldn't understand the time travel mechanic and just thought it was a dumb game. You don't always have to take their feedback, but you do want to listen to particularly what problems they have, and you can start to see whether or not you actually solve this problem. So the second thing is you need to define the problem. So what is the big problem desire your users are facing? And when we talk about defining the problem, I literally mean write a sentence. And you can, what I would do for CodeLabs is I would probably write it on a Post-it note and stick it on a door, and that is your problem. But you need to be careful at how you phrase this, because you really do want to continue to make sure that you're going back to users and real people and what problems they have and not just features. I had a slide in here twice. So here's some things not to say. I want to make a game like Minecraft, but better. That's not really, there's a few problems with that. Let's start by making one of them a little bit better. Let's get a little bit more specific. I want to make a game like Minecraft, but an MMO. Okay, at least you've gotten a little bit more specific. But MMO is not really a benefit you're providing. It's more of like a specific feature. The benefit is something, no one is thinking, no one wakes up in the morning and is like, I want to play an MMO today. People wake up, I mean, they might, but at some sense, what they're thinking of is, I want to do something that's social and is difficult today and is going to consume a lot of my time. That's probably more along why they've decided to play that MMO. And then the other thing that was a problem with that other one is it wasn't specific about who it is. So high school students, for example, want a game that's like Minecraft but an MMO. At least we've gotten a little bit more specific. We still have that problem with the, it being really feature heavy, it not being about a problem that they have. But it's at least a little more specific about the person. It's not about you anymore. It's about the person, which again was one of our primary goals. So again, going back to that MMO thing, which is the last sort of really outstanding problem with this problem definition, it's not really a problem on its own, lack of an MMO. It's you assuming that a solution will solve a problem for them. And again, we will talk about this later this week if you're still confused in the workshop on, again, I think it's Wednesday. We will talk about this, but just keep in mind, you want to be a little bit more focused on a general problem, like a feeling that they have, rather than a particular solution in mind at this point, at the point where you're defining the problem. So one thing you could say instead is high school students like casual creative games, but want a way to make new friends, rather than just playing with an existing friend group. And you can see how that's kind of related to, a game like Minecraft. But if this is, if you've always thought I wanted a game like Minecraft, but it's an MMO, that's probably closer to what you actually think. Because again, maybe Minecraft but an MMO is not actually the best way to solve this. Even if you think about it ahead of time, even if you think that is the best way to solve it, this is what I want to make, you can always explore a little bit more, and we'll talk about that with the rest of this design thinking thing. But it is probably true that if you wanted Minecraft but an MMO, what are the reasons that you wanted an MMO? Well, probably because it's more social and because it's more, fun and you can meet new friends. But it's still, it's still creative and casual. The third step, once you have that problem defined, you know what it is that you want to make. The third thing that you need to do is come up with ideas for things that will solve the problem. And like I was saying, maybe you came in with an existing idea, like I really want to make an MMO. But at this point, you really don't want to get stuck in your thinking. You really want to keep an open mind and come up with a lot of different ideas that could potentially solve the problem even better. And I know that oftentimes when we're trying to do things like this, we think, man, this is a really fun idea. I really want to do X. But oftentimes, if you do just take a step back and think through some other ideas, you can often find more fun ideas than the one that you were originally going to do. So here's some ideas for ways to come up with original ideas. So one of them is analogies. These are all, again, these aren't going to immediately give you solutions, but they're ways to sort of spark creativity. So compare the problem to something unrelated is analogies, right? How does that seem helpful? Well, it doesn't on its face, right? But let's say that I want to make an app for tennis players. How are tennis players like a toaster? I don't know, right? But as you start to think through those sort of things, that's a really weird question, and maybe it will spark something, some sort of understanding in you. How could a toaster solve the problem of a tennis player? I don't know, but maybe there's some small feature there that you can start to go off of. This is a technique for coming up with new ideas. Another one is called body storming, which is to set up a real life experience similar to the problem. If I want to make an app for people who are bored, what better way to come up with ideas for what the app could be than to sit in a room for an hour with absolutely nothing? No phones, no music, no TV, nothing. Just sit in a room for as long as you can, at least. If an hour is maybe a bit long, right? Set up a real life experience is a fun way to come up with ideas. Everyone's heard brainstorming. Write down ideas. It's a way to do it. It works better in groups sometimes, but it's a way to do it. Here's one of my favorites, worst possible idea. Instead of trying to come up with good ideas, try to come up with the worst possible way to solve it, and then just go from there and try to make it better. And then the last one is storyboarding. So draw out situations to help you visualize what's going on. Especially if you're more of an artistically minded person, that's a good way to do it. Okay, so the fourth step in design thinking is prototyping. So this goal is the goal is to test the promising ideas in the real world, but we're trying to do that as lazily as possible. So here are some examples. Let's say that we're making a game, right? What are some ways that we could test out whether or not our game is fun without actually having to go and build the entire game, which is probably going to take 2 weeks, if not more. And then you wind up with a game that's not fun. And by the way, I did that once. Some friends and I decided to make asteroids but like Minesweeper, but crossed with asteroids. So it's Minesweeper in space, and you're flying around and shooting asteroids, but if they have mines, they blow up. We spent 6 months working on this, and it was just so terrible. It was not fun at all. That's because we didn't go through this process. So what are some ways to test this out without spending those 6 months making a game that's terrible? Here's an example. Play an existing game with custom rules. So is there a board game, or is there an existing video game that you can play this in? From what I understand, I've never actually played it, but Roblox is a popular one for custom game modes. Another one is like Counter-Strike mods people do sometimes, Team Fortress mods. Those are all really old games that are pretty easy to mod, and they'll run on anything, and you can just add a new game thing. You could just take an existing game like Minecraft and just tell people, here are the rules. And in fact, you can find cool games like that. So there's, I think, what are called like survival maps. I can't remember exactly what the category is called. I remember way back in 2010, there was one called like Legendary. But it was literally, and you can find the videos of this on YouTube, it's literally like this long adventure that's played entirely in Minecraft. And there are like specific rules that you're not allowed to like break blocks to tunnel through things or something like that. But there's nothing enforcing it in the game. It's just like someone made these maps and they said, here are the rules. Could you do something like that? Just to test it out. Could you do that in 30 minutes, play a game with some friends, and find out whether or not it's fun? All of a sudden, instead of having to write all this code, you figured out what code you should be writing to begin with. Another good way to do it with games is what's called a paper prototype. So I know that it's probably impossible to simulate a real-time strategy game like StarCraft with a paper prototype. It's probably difficult to simulate something like League of Legends with a paper prototype. But if you can find a way to build the essence of what is supposed to make your game fun into a piece of paper that has rules like a board game and is turn-based, and when I say build it, I don't mean nice, I mean grid paper. That is a helpful way to go about it. And in fact, that is the way that a lot of, especially indies, prototype out games. You can find lots of blog posts about how to do this effectively, but you can do that in an hour or two instead of 2 weeks, 3 weeks. If you're making a social sharing app, you want to make an app for people to share photos of pizza. Well, you could probably just make a private Facebook group or a private Slack and then just ask people to post their photos of pizza in there. And if you have a bunch of friends who do that, that's great. I remember the last startup that I worked on, we were building something at the time that was similar to Periscope, and it had, if you've used Periscope, it's like a live streaming thing for live events that are happening right now, and it makes it easy to stream. But it wasn't going that well. We were trying out some new things, and we wanted to try. One of the things that was happening was on our app, some people would sometimes just share videos with their friends of them like eating dinner and have a live conversation with them. And so it was sort of like a Skype thing, but anyone could tune in and it was less formal. And we just sort of told people to use our app that way, right? We told people to use the existing app that way. That was just something that we did. And in fact, maybe we should have gone more toward that because it ended up being, people started using it closer to Snapchat. And then Snapchat launched, and kind of missed the timing on that. But starting out with this existing thing that we'd already built and just telling people to use it in a different way. What are the existing tools that are already out there for you? Can you tell people to use it in a different way? AI-powered website. Here's a common one for actual startups. Rather than actually developing any AI, which takes a while, just email all the submissions to a real person, and then you can manually do whatever it is you're trying to do. Whether it be like an app like Hot Dog Not Hot Dog, which tells you whether or not a picture of something is a hot dog. It's a joke app. But you don't even have to actually make the AI. You could just make it email you the picture, and you could reply back with hot dog or not hot dog and have the app display that in a push notification. And then all of a sudden, instead of training a complex AI algorithm, you've just made a very simple thing that kind of looks, you can just say, oh, it's being sent, it's being uploaded or whatever. Kind of looks like it's an AI thing, but it's actually not, so that if it turns out it's not a good idea, you don't actually have to build it. And then the last thing, once you actually have that prototype, is to test it. Now, the one thing, again, going back to that thing we were talking about at the beginning about the ice cream questions, the goal is not to prove that it's a good idea. You're not trying with your test to find a way to force people to think this is a good idea. Your goal, instead, is to prove that it's a bad idea, because you are trying to save yourself the time of spending several months of your life, potentially, at least 2 weeks with CodeLabs, working on something that no one is actually going to use. Because again, we want to build something that's like Twitch TV. We don't want to build something that's like Justin TV, which is the predecessor to Twitch TV. It was for live streaming your entire life 24/7. No one was doing it. Twitch TV, on the other hand, was a really great idea. But Justin TV was like, was a thing on its own for, I think, 4 or 5 years. And so how can you be more like Twitch TV and less like Justin TV? Don't waste your time on something that's a bad idea. Start off by trying to prove that no one wants this. And if it turns out that they have fun with your game or that they're using your app anyway, that's great. But you're not trying to force them into it. And this is, all of these steps are really not super, super linear. So I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it actually could be 1 to 2, and then back to 1 because you can't quite figure out what the problem is, and then you define the problem, and then you go to 3, but then maybe you have to go back to step 1 because you can't really come up with ideas, and you need to talk to your users more because you maybe didn't understand the problem at all, right? Or you get to the testing stage, and it turns out that your problem statement was really confusing, and what you built didn't actually solve it. It's not something that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It generally will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You won't go from 1 to 5 generally, but oftentimes you'll end up going back to a much earlier stage because you have to kind of, you do what's called iterating. You have to do this not all at once. You do it in steps, and you go back and revise your earlier steps if you need to. This is a general framework. It's not something that has to be taken literally by the book. It's just a way to try to help you think about things. So I started out this presentation and this, this general thing about thinking about what in CodeLabs you're going to make. But really after this, what I want you to think about as you're trying to come up with what it is that you're going to make is actually what problem will you solve? What problem do you want to solve? Is it going to be, again, if you're working on a game, laziness? Is it going to be boredom? Is it going to be having something fun to do at a party with your friends, right? If you're building an app, what problem will that solve? If you're building a website, what problem will that solve? Start there, pick a problem, and that's a lot easier to do sometimes than picking an app that you're going to work on. And once you have that problem, from there we're going to go into, actually deciding on what app it is you're going to make. So I would go through this sort of process today. This video will be uploaded to our YouTube once this is done, but really try to do this today because we have 2 weeks in CodeLabs. You have hopefully a meeting with your mentor scheduled either by now or later in the day. You'll have a meeting scheduled, but you really need to actually start to think about what it is that you're going to be doing in CodeLabs. And starting on this process today, you can spend an hour on this and have some ideas for apps that you could be making during CodeLabs. You don't have to do the entire process all the way through super detailed because I know we are kind of time constrained. But this is a useful thing to know, and it's going to help you make something that all your friends are actually going to want to use, or at least the friends that you know are your potential users. So go ahead and give that a thought. Thanks for coming to the workshop. I don't see any obvious questions that people have had, but if you do, chat.srnd.org, talk to us. We can help you brainstorm. You can find other potential users. You can talk to your mentor, but you do really have to come up with an idea. So now is the time to do that. And with that in mind, thank you all for coming, and hope that you can come up with something great today, and hopefully have it for the workshop tomorrow where we talk about how to get things done. Thanks.